Director of Programs and lead on the Human-Elephant Conflict and Coexistence work at the Elephant Protection Initiative Foundation. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to our session, which I'm moderating on shifting paradigms, uniting site-level responses for human-elephant conflict to global solutions for conservation in a changing world. I'm joined today by brilliant panelists with a wealth of knowledge and experience, and let me go ahead and introduce them. Right here is Dr. Luizza, Program Officer with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service International Affairs Program. Matt is an interdisciplinary conservation geographer, ecologist with over 10 years of experience working on conservation governance, biodiversity conservation, and program design and management. He manages the African Elephant Conservation Fund, in addition to serving as the technical lead for the Service on Pastoralism and Protected Area Dynamic in Africa, Sudan, Sahel, and across sub-Saharan Africa. Matt is, as well as many things, the U.S. government focal point for the IUCN's Human-Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence Specialist Group. Next to him is Mr. Kaelo Nekile, Principal Ecologist and Conservation Biologist with the Department of Wildlife and National Parks, Ministry of Environment and Tourism, Botswana. Kaelo has 17 years of experience in wildlife conservation and management with a focus on research and long-term monitoring, as well as managing human-wildlife conflicts. He is currently based out of Chobe, northern Botswana. Next to Kaelo is Dr. Michelle Henley, CEO, co-founder, and principal researcher at Elephants Alive. Michelle is an award-winning conservationist with a PhD in elephant ecology and has studied elephants for more than 25 years. She has published numerous scientific papers and book chapters, as well as popular press. She is a trustee of the Elephant Specialist Advisory Group of South Africa, Elephants for Africa, and an invited member of the African Elephant Specialist Group of the IUCN on the Human-Elephant Conflict Working Group. And last but not least, Dr. Jake Wall, which I think we all know well, is the Director and Research of Conservation at the Mara Elephant Project, and now also Director of Analytics for EarthRanger. He did not get a chance to send me his bio, so I'll let him speak and introduce himself.
Hi, I'm in my 20th year of conservation, elephant conservation, and 5th year in the Mara, and have a PhD in movement ecology, elephant movement ecology.
Thank you so much. So, this conference in the last few days here in Cape Town, we've heard from a plethora of sessions which have been so impressive and truly inspirational. It's my first time to attend EarthRanger, and it's made me really optimistic about how much progress is happening in integrating, scaling, and sharing the incredible work that technology rollouts are being used by so many stakeholders. It's also encouraging to see that dedicated data collection and analysis is now being used in many ways in conjunction and contributing to environmental as well as human safeguards. From accessibility of tech and data, predictive risk maps and forecasting, digitizing strategies and infrastructure, AI deep learning, the integration of academia, and also yesterday's really interesting session on EcoScope's standardized reporting system. But today, and for those who know me, it won't be a surprise that I think it's an opportunity for us to get honest and vulnerable and have a frank discussion about the limitations of technology that we're facing, especially with the ones that are deploying these technologies and also creating them. Technology is an incredible tool, yes, and it works wonders in specific contexts in relation to species, projects, and data management, and of course monitoring and evaluation. But as we all sit on the same side of the conservation arena, we also know that despite these amazing technological advances that we're seeing, we're also nevertheless losing species at a faster rate than ever. We are really struggling to reverse the climate change and biodiversity loss across the continent and the planet. So before I proceed, I want to set the scene for our discussions, and I'll share a short film from my home country in Ethiopia.
Hi, my name is Greta Lori, and I work with the 21 African member states who make up the Elephant Protection Initiative. Today we're in my home country in the Babile Elephant Sanctuary found in eastern Ethiopia. We're here because the Babile Sanctuary is facing severe human-elephant conflict, which is compromising the viability of the elephant survival as well as the livelihood of the people.
We are here, some 500 kilometers east of Addis Ababa, because the sanctuary is on the verge of collapse. The survival of the few remaining elephants, as well as the livelihoods of my fellow people, are under grave threat. There is unprecedented human-elephant conflict. Babile's unique landscape makes up 7,000 kilometers of the extensive Somali Maasai biome. Elephants once freely roamed here. Today, they're restricted to a few tiny pockets of land, the last remnants of the Somali elephant race, Africa's most northeastern elephants. The elephant's habitat suffers from devastating fragmentation and destruction caused by ethnic divisions, lack of governance, and climate change. It is a harsh environment where elephants, people, and their livestock compete for water, land, and survival every single day. Protected areas in Ethiopia generate little to no significant benefits for local communities, but they are often nature and wildlife's only lifeline in a vastness of threats. Babile's elephants have lost more than 3/4 of their land, taken over by farms, roads, and factories.
Amma arbee duwara baay'een hojjetaa jiru waraanni immoo waraanni arbaa baay'ee eegu jiru iddoo inni jiraatu waan itti rakkachaa jirtuuf waan mancaasaa jiraniif bakka taa'u dhabee waan hawaasa ol deemee hawaasa waan miidhaa jiruuf ammoo warri isaan eegu baay'ee waan ammas asitti waan xiqqaateef waraanni dabalamee fi sirriitti eegamuu barbaada iddoo isaatti deebi'ee jiru.
Babile urgently needs effective land use planning, more resources, and high-level government intervention.
መፍትሄው እንግዲህ እንደኔ ከሆነ መንግስት እዚህ ላይ መስራት አለበት ብዬ ገምታለሁ። ለምን አንደኛ በደንብ አርግቶ ከዚህ መስራት ካልቻለ መንግስት እኛም ራሳችን ያው እንደምንሞት እርግጠኛ ነኝ።
Short-term solutions, fences, or watchtowers can buy us time, but they're not enough. We must find a path to prosperity and coexistence for people and elephants, not one at the expense of the other. The wildlife authorities and rangers are demoralized and feel abandoned.
Limited capacity and poor performance at all levels. That means the number of scouts, the number of workers, even the budget is so limited. The main gap to save elephant sanctuary is lack of political commitment from government side.
But local people also pay the price for this neglect. They need peace and land.
Tore beete amma namni dho tore karaa nurra beelal karaa inni gadi ol yaa'u karaa nurra deema inni yoo baree jira nuti hin jirre gaaf tokko seene bakka paappaayee jira muusaa jira ambaa appil jaaniin jira waa hundaa jira ooludha nyaata bakka dadhabne jechuudha nu harkaa fudhatee agaafa kun uummanni arbaa kun dhaqee ilaalee akkasii ambaa jala fuudhuu geellee qaba dadhabne rasaasaas hin qabnu beektee waan silaafaraa gubbaa dhoyine deebisnus. dadhabnee fira isumaa qabaa rakkoo kana mootummaa namarraa furuu
The stories we've heard here are heartbreaking because they're the realities of the people who live alongside these elephants. There are no simple solutions. Extreme poverty, lack of governance at large, ethnic divisions are pushing elephants and people into extremes. One thing is for sure. We can't simply focus only on the technical conservation solutions to this challenge. We're going to have to center the social, political, cultural, economic realities of the people who live here. And only then will we be able to save this landscape, our wildlife, and protect the rights of our people.
So, at the Elephant Protection Initiative, by the way, before I get
Step into Rick Steep.
Oh, you too. Okay, we're back. That's good. We can laugh it off. That was intense. Okay. Very sadly, this past September, after decades of fighting to safeguard that specific sanctuary, the Babili Elephant Sanctuary, authorities handed over a 400-hectare chunk of land to agricultural investors without any broader consultation. So I wanted to set the scene because at the Elephant Protection Initiative, we've really thought long and hard about these bigger systemic challenges and uncomfortable questions that we're facing. And we work with 23 EPI African Elephant Range member states to gently but firmly discuss these realities. From a conservation perspective, indeed from any other perspectives, these are 23 countries of extraordinary variety. Some have well-run protected areas and national parks and lucrative wildlife economies. Others deeply struggle to manage their parks and have no realistic prospects of tourism, often linked to years of broader geopolitical setbacks and colonial impacts. Some are now only emerging from decades of conflict. Others, very sadly, are still at war, or even worse, descending into new conflicts. In countries plagued by political instability, extreme poverty, and inequality, it's very hard to make progress on conservation. And I'm preaching to the converted here, we all know this. But even in countries that appear stable and have a strong commitment to their environments, things don't always go as planned, especially during a climate crisis. Gabon, a founding member of the EPI, has been seen as a role model in forest conservation in recent years. So what will the recent coup mean for its elephants, its local communities, its commitments to forests and protected areas in the long term? In Kenya and Tanzania, countries renowned for their long-standing commitments to conservation face rapidly changing landscapes, crippling droughts at the hands of climate change, wild animals no longer congregating within the borders of their protected areas, obviously leading to growing competition for dwindling resources. And in Botswana, home to the largest population of elephants in the world, over 130,000 within its borders, the financial costs and burdens to safeguard them and mitigate the negative impacts on their human-elephant conflict, they've been largely left alone to deal with that. But yet, on the international arena, we speak how elephants are considered global heritage. Although these complexities do not have a black and white solution, can we go further as conservationists to face these difficult realities head-on as partners and as collaborators? That's essentially what today's conversation is about. And friends, I hope I haven't been too provocative or pessimistic, but I really wanted to set the scene and highlight the political truths that many of us work in and will return to after our incredible time here in Cape Town. Every opportunity that we can bring our heads and heart together to discuss these difficult questions, these difficult realities, I believe is a step in the right direction. So before I let our phenomenal panelists address two questions which I sent to them beforehand, I wanted to also get a buy-in from all of you, and I'll be using a Menti screen. I don't know if any of you have ever used this before, but you should be able to use your phones to scan that QR code, and you'll be able to answer anonymously what you believe are the main barriers preventing conservationists from working together and adopting more interdisciplinary approaches to influence change. If the QR code is not working, you can just type menti.com and then enter the code, which is 42801278. And there are two slides. I'll give you about 2 minutes to do both. As you start filling them in, we should be able to see a word cloud come up. And maybe I'll try myself. There we go. Only 2 people have responded, by the way. I can tell, so. Great, there we go. So I won't reveal the results until after the session, but I'll leave this up for 30 more seconds. Great, and just 2 more seconds if you want to fill the questions in. And then the second question is, how can technology and collaboration address the gap between site-level conservation efforts and systemic challenges more effectively? So I'll give you a minute here. Great, so I'll leave that up and I'll turn it over to my panelists, and because I'd love to hear the different and varied perspectives that you have from your own experiences. And maybe we'll start with the first question, which was, what are the main barriers preventing conservationists from working together and adopting more interdisciplinary approaches to influence change? Whoever wants to go first, please just pick up the mic and speak.
I certainly think one of the main barriers, I mean, it's quite obvious, but it's a lack of communication. You know, if I take our example, working across 2 trans-frontier conservation areas, often people work in silos within their own country, while we know that 76% of elephants are actually trans-boundary elephants moving across different countries. And to give you a practical example, in South Africa, you know, Kruger National Park only operates within Kruger, but yet those elephants are moving outside of Kruger into Mozambique and raiding crops of the people on the Mozambique side. And there was a great lack of communication and even a sense of taking responsibility when that happens, when elephants move outside of a protected area. So I also think what's necessary to break the silo is how we view these elephants. So these elephants that are pushing boundaries, and I'm talking specifically about elephants that are connecting protected areas, so in other words, moving up and down these corridors, I actually think they are vital messages. They're sending us vital messages that we should see them as landscape planners and not damage-causing animals. So to give you another example, in South Africa, people see elephants that break outside of a protected area, they immediately get branded as a damage-causing animal, and then 9 times out of 10 they'll be shot. And I really think that because we know that biodiversity is often, we can't protect enough biodiversity by only looking in the protected areas. We need to actually value these animals that are connecting protected areas and start looking at how we can address biodiversity objectives outside of protected areas. But to lead to the second question, which I won't answer now, I just think it's really vital that you can actually only consider that if you also take responsibility for the people that have to share the landscape with those elephants. So I really think that communication, and not only looking within your protected area and not only looking within your country, is absolutely key.
Thank you, Michelle. Go ahead.
Yeah, I also think the part of the issue is that every landscape is so unique. There's commonalities with conflict, but there's also huge differences in what conflict is. And if you have an area where you have agriculture, if you have an area where you have lots of linear infrastructure like fencing, and just the ability to apply solutions across these different areas is challenging. And I think probably what we need more of is case studies of what's been trialed and also what hasn't worked. I think we focus, on donor funding, and we always want to say what's going great, but we never really talk about what we tried and failed. So I would agree, more communication amongst organizations, and looking at how can we communicate failure as well as success.
Thank you, Greta. Good morning, colleagues. I think one of the things is uncoordinated efforts. If you look at efforts like TFCAs, where countries come together to say, okay, we'll manage these wildlife populations as a block, like in the Casa block, you'll see that Botswana is doing or conducting an activity on the other end, and our colleagues in Namibia are doing the same. Whereas if we could pool all these resources together and coordinate our activities, we could achieve a lot. But some of these things we discuss them, we come together to discuss them. For example, in Casa, I think 2 months back, my director will testify, Casa called the partner states to the University of Namibia, where we identified the gaps in the landscape, areas of cooperation, areas of possible research, so that we can, those with resources can mobilize, and we all do these activities in a coordinated manner. So all this can be achieved if we communicate, like my fellow panelists have said. It's very important to do this together.
Thanks, everyone. I will first give my sort of obligatory disclaimer that this is my personal perspective, so what I'm saying doesn't necessarily represent the official views of the US government. But I first want to, again, thank Greta for this opportunity, and I think this type of a panel is really, really important, especially to kind of be an end cap on what has been a really fantastic few days. And I'll just briefly build on, I think my esteemed panelists have really hit the nail on the head with a lot of things related to uncoordinated efforts and sort of the arbitrary jurisdictional boundaries that hem in what are large mammals with large ranges that are moving across these arbitrary politically imposed boundaries, and to the point of sort of the multidimensional nature of human-elephant conflict, that it can pose really big challenges to engaging in really interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary approaches. From a donor perspective, I will own the fact that I also think the donor community ourselves are very siloed, and so that doesn't really facilitate explicitly a lot of the essential work that crosses those disciplinary boundaries to engage in really holistic, meaningful approaches to conservation on the ground. And I think, this, getting back to the communication piece, this really does require these strong collaborations that are breaking those sectoral and disciplinary silos between researchers, practitioners, community members, governments, decision makers that are really fostering mutual learning. And I think, again, we'll probably get into this with the next prompt, but that's really fostering that mutual learning, that co-production of knowledge that's both scientifically rigorous, and this is where I think technology can play a really important supporting role, a supporting acting role, but also socially relevant. And that's, I think, something that is a wicked problem that we will continue to face, especially, and I think the Babile sanctuary example is quite illustrative, and obviously, and sadly, it's not the only one that speaks to these dynamics.
Thank you so much, Matt. These are all such key and relevant comments, and I think, Matt, actually just off the back of what you've just said, I think it was 2020 and 2021 when we were on several calls discussing the challenges and mainly my frustration with the lack of funding and donor engagement on the importance of gathering important stakeholders, especially when it came to human-elephant conflict. We had just launched our vision, we had just launched our strategy, And because I didn't come from a nation and worked in an area, the Horn of Africa, where we were so behind the element of deploying technologies and so on, and there was no donor that was willing to bring people together. It wasn't something that was exciting. And I spoke about it to you, and so you can imagine my excitement this year when I saw the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's current NOFO, the Notice for Funding, that has a point that specifically addresses greater partner connectivity and conservation capacity in African elephant range states. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, thank you for giving a plug to the funding call. So yeah, the African Elephant Conservation Fund, it used to be an annual call for proposals, so providing support to conservation efforts, protecting and conserving forest and savanna elephants across 37 range countries. This year, I've shifted the fund from an annual to a biennial, and this year the call, which has $8 million in support for funding, is, as Greta noted, intentionally is calling out some key objectives. And those 3 objectives, revolve around habitat protection and conservation of elephant priority populations, improved governance and human well-being in elephant landscapes, and then the third one being really about emphasizing the importance of greater partner connectivity and capacity development in African elephant range states. So if you're not aware, but the funding call ends, the application cycle closes this month, so November 27th, but we are looking for proposals still.
Thank you. Yeah, so I wanted to put that out there because all of us are practitioners. It's important for us to be aware of it. So I think we can go into the second question, which is, I think, the area of hope and how can technology and collaboration address the gap between site-level conservation efforts and systemic challenges more effectively. And maybe, Michelle, you can start as well, discussing how there is this conservation community, which we are all passionate, we are all incredible, emotive, sensitive beings, but sometimes we're also extremely divisive. We, in some cases, also polarize and unable to engage with multiple truths. It's my way or your way, and there's no middle ground. So what roles can technology specifically play in bringing communities together that have different views? I'm really interested to hear about that.
So I think one of the most important things, and this is certainly what we've learned with tracking elephants, is they actually show you who you should be talking to. So they're not only connecting protected areas, which has massive biodiversity implications, but they're connecting people and conversations. And, if I just take our example at Elephants Alive, we've had a whole new network of people that we are engaging with because of the elephants moving across boundaries. So I think once again it's that paradigm shift for the elephants themselves to stop seeing them as a problem, but actually as an opportunity to engage, and especially if they're moving across boundaries. So that's really important. And on the technology side, obviously with the collars and with the help of amazing people like Jake, you can start using technology and building models. Like, I don't know if you saw Cassandra's presentation yesterday, but we were asked by our partners, which we met because of elephants, the Mozambique Wildlife Alliance. We had a really strong partnership with them in Mozambique because that's where the elephants took us. But they asked us to try and address human-elephant conflict over a 175,000 square kilometre area. And we are a very small NGO, and that request was incredibly daunting. But we could use technology because of the collars to narrow down the focus areas of where the most conflict is and address those first of all using modelling and predictive modelling based on the movements of elephants and also various spatial layers that would drive their movements to particular areas, which phosphorus was quite an important driver that came to the surface. So that's an example, but I'm a very strong believer in applied research. So to me, technology in a silo is not very useful, because what's most important with human-elephant conflict is actually addressing the people aspect of it. So I feel it has to go hand in hand with very practical ways of addressing human safety, because that's the most important aspect that you've got to address immediately, which once again, with our partnership with Mozambique Wildlife Alliance, having an elephant shepherd team, 2 guys on a motorbike, toolkits, playing to the senses of elephants. I mean, it's quite obvious they've got big ears and a large trunk, so any aversion method that you can apply in a reactive way that affects their smell and their hearing. And I think this is where we can partner and all come up with new techniques. Because we've got our little tool set, but I can tell you in South Africa we've got one particular elephant and we're going to have to think of new toolkits that we put in because he's just become used to what we've already had. But that tool set works really well in Mozambique where the elephants are more frightened of people. But I feel with all the different areas where we're trying different ways, just in a reactive way to scare elephants, come together and maybe have a think tank about it, we'll come up with some novel ways, practical ways of frightening elephants. But that's only one layer of the puzzle. The other is also to improve the resilience of people that have to live with elephants. And I think this is where we're also busy experimenting with what I like to call soft barriers. So these are unpalatable crops that have a market value. So even if the elephant does eat your corn crop, if you can offset those losses by selling essential oils because you've grown an unpalatable crop that has a high essential oil value, you won't be so irate and you won't feel so threatened. So to me that's an example of using technology to understand where these hotspots are, address human safety first, and then very importantly increase the resilience of the people that have to live with people with elephants so that they don't feel it as a financial loss. So, I mean, to us, if people can realize that it's actually a bonus with living with wildlife rather than a burden, that's of key importance. But that's going to take a massive think tank where we all just put our heads together and come up with novel experiments.
Standardized monitoring and figuring out how we can objectively quantify conflict. For instance, with the elephant carcass information, we have the MIC program, and it's a very well-defined system for recording carcasses, how they died, over which areas, but we lack that with conflict. And so there's many, many ways you can measure conflict. There's crop rating, there's infrastructure damage, there's reactions to conflict incidents which get recorded, but is that really capturing the nature of the conflict? And some of the work that Lydia did in the Mara showed that you have very low levels of conflict happening that are not getting recorded. And an elephant walks through a gate, pushes the gate over. Well, does that really get recorded in a formal way? But it's part of the drivers of resentment to elephants. And then we have the extreme of elephants getting shot and killed as a result of conflict. So there's this huge range of conflict, but we haven't systematized how we record and how we report on it. So I think that would be one step that we could kind of harmonize on different levels. With our elephant book system that we're creating, for instance, we have a way now of identifying injuries on elephants. So this is yet another method potentially of looking at how elephants are sustaining injuries from conflict. I think mitigation, active mitigation, there's a role for technology. At MEP, we've adopted drones very effectively, but drones are expensive. They require licenses. They're not a solution for every community member to own a drone and push elephants out. But that's a very high end. We're also going very low tech. We're doing a similar thing. We've got an experimental farm where we're looking at 35 different crop types and trying to understand selection behavior by elephants. And so by diffusing, like Michelle said, if you can diffuse the conflict over that resource, the problem hopefully will go away. And if you're growing non-palatable crops, but we're also looking at, does those is there a market for non-palatable crops? Do you shift from maize to growing essential oils, but then you can't sell them? So there has to be a market, there has to be social buy-in and acceptance. And as I think education, building that sense of, we're both humans and elephants need to be here. And just changing that mentality of us versus them, and really putting a lot into education on how we can coexist, and moving it from conflict to coexistence. Let's really promote coexistence. And then especially technology as well can come into some of the spatial planning. I think these, reducing the conflict gradient, so these hard boundaries where you have a fence and then community land with crops, and then on the other side of the fence you have a protected area for wildlife. That it just seems to really promote conflict. So how could we have, plan better, buffer zones, mixed use livestock grazing, and really identify in each ecosystem what is the driver of conflict. So in the Mara on the western side, it's agriculture, and if you go to the eastern side, it's usually over water or salt licks. So I think humans and elephants can really display amazing coexistence. Where we worked in Mali, we had a photo of a goat eating acacia branches out of the mouth of an elephant, and they just were in amongst each other. And you find other sites where, if there's a livestock animal, it just gets immediately killed by elephants. So I think there is a huge gradient in the problem, and each site will have its unique solutions.
Yeah, I think technology is good, but then you realize it's us practitioners who are using technology. I'm a wildlife officer, so in Botswana, where I come from, we've just adopted EarthRanger, and it's piloted in the area where I'm based in Chobe. So I was thinking, look, okay, as a government, as rangers, we are going to use this technology, but what about the rural communities? What about our farmers who are terrorized by elephants and other species? How are they going to fit in this whole EarthRanger thing? If it is able to tell me, look, the elephant is approaching the field, how does the farmer themselves get to take advantage of EarthRanger? So it's not easy. I think as much as farmers have been using the traditional methods, beat the drums, dig around the plowing field, these are not working. And if technology can enhance all these traditional methods, then I think our rural communities will embrace the technology. Otherwise, the way it is currently, I think they're not benefiting that much from these many technological developments that are being implemented. In Botswana, they have tried to come up with introduction of early maturing seeds for farmers, so that when they plow, they can quickly harvest before the crops can be attacked by elephants, which is very good, and the idea is embraced by the local community. So other technologies that they have brought, one of the organizations, they have come up with this little tape. I don't know if you know it. It doesn't need any specialist to install. You just take it around the perimeter of the playing field. So it vibrates and apparently makes a noise that irritates elephants. But it has to be electrically charged so that it produces that deterrent sound to the elephant. So as much as all these ideas are coming together, what we need to see on the ground is the improvement of this. As farmers adopt these things, the livestock gets better, the food production gets better, food security, because the livelihoods of our rural communities really depend on farming and livestock production. So our efforts really should be channeled to realizing that the rural communities achieve their livelihoods. Thank you.
I'll keep it brief again. I think my colleagues have really hit on some key points, and I know we want to leave time for some discussion. I think I'll go back though to this is more so echoing what I think I've heard from all three of you, is that I would almost reframe this question of having it focus on how can collaborative partnerships be better supported by technology. Again, I think that, as others have said, technology should play the supporting role, that it's not going to fix, in a vacuum, fix this really complex multi-dimensional issue of human-elephant conflict. So at best, if it's done in that way, it's gonna miss a lot of potential for impact, and at worst, it's actually gonna be harmful on the ground. And so I think, that for me, from a donor perspective, again, one area, well, first I'll note that I'm continue to be humbled, especially at this space of engaging with the partners on the ground, including many of you, most of you in the audience. We're very proud of Fish and Wildlife Service to be, for example, supporting Elephants Alive in their work with Mozambique Wildlife Alliance, that you all are doing that heavy lifting that is really essential for this work to be meaningful. And I think that from my perspective, one of the roles that technology plays is it gives you all, the practitioners, the conservation managers, breathing space to focus on the relationship building that is quite essential for this work to actually be meaningful on the ground. So it can minimize the burden of having to manage, massive databases, or it can standardize things for better analysis, but that shouldn't be the end goal. That I think, as Jake, you were saying, reframing, but moving towards coexistence. And coexistence is not a static end state. It is a process. It is an adaptive, evolving process that really requires a lot of investment in trust building and relationship building. And I know all of us, here at Conservation, it is about the flora, the fauna, the preserving and protecting species that, as Greta, as you mentioned, the international community uses global heritage. But I think, you brought this up, Michelle, that, at the end of the day, it's about people. Conservation is about managing relationships, conflict management, trust, regaining, building trust. And so technology can provide, breathing room, I think, for conservation practitioners to focus on that. And as a donor community, it's also on us, I think, we are looking for, that evidence base. And I think, again, Jake, you bring up good points about where that evidence base can be improved. We're seeing fantastic examples throughout this conference of where those things can be enhanced, whether it's through Ecoscope or Save the Elephants in the Continental Elephant Tracking Initiative, that can really improve our understanding of larger landscape scale dynamics. But again, I think, one thing that's often hard to measure, for the donor community to see measured, is those process-based things that are so essential, like social capital building, trust building with communities. And if you don't have that foundation, then all the technology interventions are going to be for nothing. These are the places and spaces that will determine the fate of elephants. And I think, again, I'm very heartened and humbled to hear, folks that are already thinking in this way and applying this on the ground. I think the next phase, in my view, is then it's taking from the local scale these interventions that, again, the triage, that is entirely necessary and essential, but wholly insufficient in the long run to actually fix the root problems of dwindling space and competition for limited resources. That really, it has to happen on that local scale, and it's important for protecting lives and livelihoods, elephants and people. But now, it goes up to then talking about policy making, land use planning, and decision making related to things like linear infrastructure, habitat loss, growing populations. And so there's a scale issue that there needs to be simultaneous interventions. And again, technology can play a role, but it really should be the supporting actor to what really should be about focus on these collaborative partnerships that, again, bring results of the technology back to communities that are most affected on the ground in meaningful ways. And I think, Jake, you also brought this up, but there are low-tech solutions. Technology is not always what needs to be done. It can be high-tech, it can be quite low-tech. And the Mali example just reminded me of, it's about leveraging and building off of the values that are already there with the communities that share these landscapes. So in the Gorma region, you have a host of ethnic groups that interact with elephants in different ways, and they all share different values that are positive towards elephant. The Tuareg, if elephants come through their camp, they view that as good luck. The Dogon view elephants as having human flesh, human blood, that if you eat an elephant, kill it, it's cannibalism. The Fulani are maybe more pragmatic, and they view it along the lines of we see increased milk production when elephants come through, and that's likely linked with that ecosystem engineer. But it's, that ethic is already there, and it's about providing that, again, the tools, the space, the resources for the communities that are already sharing these landscapes and often already have that clearly built in, valuation and ethic for conserving elephants in these landscapes. But I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Matt. And I think there's so much that we can talk about. We could have a conference just about this topic. It's that complex, it's that important. But I think one thing that really excites me is what you all mentioned regarding, how can we record and report on instances of human-elephant conflict? How do we measure what conflict means? It's very, very personal to the individual. It depends who you are, how you engage in that land, how you engage with that wildlife. But often environmentalists only engage with environmentalists, even, not just at these conferences, but even at the government level, it's always the environmental departments that are engaging together, and we are really, really lacking the influence we require to influence other industries. So the agricultural industry, the mining industry, the finance industries, the ministries that essentially shape the land without engaging with the environmental departments. So can we use all the incredible advances in technology to bring them to our side? Because just the way technology helps us understand our work better, I think technology can play a huge role in really simplifying the doom that we are facing to people that are not so well versed in that space. And another thing, one last question before I open it up to the audience. I think, resolving human-elephant conflict and wildlife conflict at large is a big money game, because it doesn't just tackle that interface, it tackles many issues along huge landscapes. It's, transboundary, it's very difficult to pull off as just a project. It's heavy stuff, it includes fatalities, it includes losses of assets, livelihoods, and to many of us that are working in that space, there's a steep price that people pay that are working to resolve this, both mentally, emotionally, physically. And so, over the last few years, we've seen a huge increase of discussing of carbon credits and now biodiversity credits, and how they can bring that big money that is required to help us solve planetary issues. But there are, of course, trust issues. We've seen that with carbon now, which is tainting our potential of rolling that out in some areas, because they want to see receipts. They want to see how it's actually going to make a difference. How can we champion long-term financing solutions and accountability through tech? Is this something that we're thinking as donors, as government, as practitioners? Because there's obviously an unsustainability of constantly going to project-related funding mechanisms when they're such huge-scale problems. And if everyone can speak for 1-2 minutes, and then we'll open it to the topic.
Yeah, for governments, because I work for government, I think if you take the case of Botswana, where we spent millions of pula to compensate for the losses suffered by farmers, it's not sustainable at all. I mean, for Chobe alone, the annual budget for compensation is about 5 million pula, just to compensate for crop raiding, loss of property. But if technology could come in, if we could embrace it, I mean, we may have few cases, if any, of human-wildlife conflicts, and therefore that money that we channel into compensating for these losses could be used for community development, to augment the budget that's used for communities, for schools, or amenities like electricity and water. Because we run a community-based natural resources model, which is not by itself sustainable. We try to bring things like trophy hunting, then the world suddenly raises the eyebrows. So if technology could started implementing SMART, which we are willing to learn from them. When they were presenting yesterday, we could see a lot of positives. And where I was seated, I thought, wow, if only we could also embrace the same idea, we could go a long way as a country. So yeah, it is really going to make a difference if it is implemented in the right way. Thank you.
I want to maybe suggest a more basic way in which technology can foster like a feeling of solidarity between people that are suffering from maybe crop raiding, for instance, or their livelihoods are threatened. And I think we need to showcase or tell the stories of individual people in different sites, as Jake was saying, have different case studies where the people themselves are talking, because, we have these conferences or we engage with politicians, but we're not living on the ground. And I think just, once again, in our example, when we brought people from Tanzania and from Kenya to the same site where people in Mozambique were suffering from elephants, you could almost see a sigh of relief on those people's faces, because they realized we're not alone. Like, we're one country in Africa and there's a lot of countries that are experiencing the same thing, and that immediately made people feel that, okay, we can solve this together. So this might be a way in which we either have a database where we connect on film the case studies or the stories of individual people and create a platform where they can talk to each other, whether it's somebody in the Kaneni district that's been experiencing elephant problems can talk to somebody in Mozambique, and they can share, and whether it's translated, it doesn't matter. It's just, I feel we should take it more to the people so that they don't feel alone in this, because that's part of feeling that, these problems can be overcome because we're all putting our heads together. I would just suggest that as a very different way in which we can address or use technology to create solidarity and build relationship amongst people.
Thank you, Michelle. I love that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Just one note from the Mara. I mean, we operate 9 ranger teams that will actively go and mitigate conflict. But actually, one of the biggest services they provide is simply going and talking to the community. When they've had a crop raiding event, and they just listen. And that, we've been told many times, is building that social capital, that just someone that shows up and is concerned about their problem because they feel they don't have an ear. And another interesting thing on the finance side that we're looking at, we're not doing it, but sounds interesting, is this micro insurance for crop raiding, and that kind of changes that model of government, relying on the government to compensate, which really creates sort of this divide of, oh, those are government animals that have come and raided our crops, and now we want to be compensated. They often fail just from lack of capacity. But if there's micro insurance where a farmer can actually, pay a small amount of money, but is actually compensated, that helps to really reduce that feeling of frustration when your field of maize gets wiped out in a night.
Matt, 1 minute. In the
Yeah,
interest of time.
Yep, and I don't have much to add. I think I would just echo, I think there's really great points made about all. Just to quickly go back to Michelle's point, I liked how you framed elephants will show you who you need to talk to, and I would echo that. I think that often the people most affected are the last that see a response, whether if there's a conflict incident. I've heard many times from communities where if an elephant is shot, helicopters are there within an hour or 20 minutes, but if a person is killed, it may take days, months, for a response. I think having those voices heard is really important. And I think from, again, the donor side, I think we all know that conservation is woefully underfunded. And I'll note for the Elephant Fund, the last funding call we had 4 times the amount of requests to the available funds. And I think, from our side, continuing to, see where people can voice the importance of that, to where we can see more support from range state, but also the international community, governments to invest in this. Linked with, again, lots at different scales, lots of innovations and testing of ideas, whether that's biodiversity credits, or we're talking about parks that are getting into crypto mining to be more sustainable and fund their efforts. I think there's lots of things on the horizon. We'll see how feasible they are, but I do like going back to some of the points made that it really also comes back to having the people most affected having their voices heard and feeling a sense of shared commitment, and our fates are intertwined, the communities and the elephants that are sharing these landscapes. So.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to share the Menti results. So the first one, which was what are the main barriers, as you can see, I'll read them out because they're pretty small. So bureaucracy was mentioned. So the bigger the word, the more it was mentioned. So bureaucracy, language, resources, funding, communication, cohesiveness, understanding, funds, politics, distance, conflicting agendas, territoriality, time constraints, competition for resources, corruption. Yeah, so these are the main words that come up that you resonate with in terms of what are the main barriers that are preventing us from working together across influential spaces. And then the second one was how can technology and collaborations address the issue? And the words are, well, so clear for everyone: engagement, combined efforts, analysis, awareness, buy-in, data integration, improved livelihoods, collaborative projects, coordination, centralization, real-time monitoring, open up community, real-time data sharing, comparable data, share ideas of success, knowledge share. So essentially it's just breaking down binaries and the boundaries and the gatekeeping. So very much aligned to everything that we've been discussing today. So we have about 3 minutes, but we'll make it 5 because this is very interesting. If anyone has any questions for our brilliant panelists, please go ahead. We'll take like 2 or 3. Oh yeah.
Yeah, my name is John Pameri from Kenya, the Wildlife Conservancy, and I think thanks for all your ideas, and I'm just looking in different levels in terms of internationally looking the funding, maybe internationally talking the way the scientists have been talking about human-wildlife conflict. That is one of the categories which need to be addressed, funding and all that. Then you come to the second category, which is the countries talking to each other. We are facing the same problem, and I think that is where we need actually to talk. Then going down to the community and to the parks, to the sites. I think that is another level. So having those levels and discuss those levels, I think the solution will come, because the sites will have technology, will have people, will have communities. So to address each level will really help a lot of human-wildlife conflict on this. What we are doing in Lewa, we have a dedicated team, a mobile team responding to those issues of human-wildlife conflict, and it's really helping. The team having technology, they have EarthRanger mobile, collecting all the data, and we can able to use the data to address issues with that. So I think if we can categorize in different levels, fundraising level, countries talking, and the ground in terms of sites and communities and technology, I think we can be good to go. Thank you. That's my advice.
Okay, thank you. If there's any one question, we'll take it. If not, you can find the panelists. But perfect. There's one. Okay, we'll take those 2 questions and then we'll close up.
Thank you. You already touched on a lot what I wanted to say as well. And thank you so much for this very valuable discussion. And my big question actually is not just to you, but to everyone, how are we going into action now? Because I think with every conference, whenever we come together, the key is always to share. How do we share? How do we connect? How do we cooperate? And it's beautiful to see how many projects kind of run parallel, but we don't know. And specifically sharing failures along the way, not only in hindsight necessarily, I think is also valuable, and it also depends on us being vulnerable as well, and sort of accepting the fact that we don't have the answers, and that perhaps the project doesn't go exactly the way we wanted it to go, and you know, instead of sort of covering that up, actually saying, well, damn it, it didn't go that way, and this is what I've learned. And then it's amazing how many people say, well, me too. And so I love the ideas that were shared on the different levels as well, because it's exactly what I think we need to talk about. And yes, we can use technology for that. So what do we do next, now, literally, today, perhaps even, to do that step, to share more and be in contact constantly, actually? That's my question.
Thanks for that, and thanks for both. I think to touch on just very quickly, I think you're right on that there are these scales issues, and they're not easy fixes. I think even at the local level, we see that there's a lot of interventions happening that are really important. They're context specific. They may work in one landscape in one setting that's not necessarily applicable in another, but there's often gaps in communicating those lessons learned. I think there's been really great examples of moving the needle in the right direction, of sharing resources like the human-elephant conflict toolkit that Save the Elephants put together, EPIF strategy on human-elephant conflict that's looking to span not just the continent, so Africa, Asian elephant landscapes. I think the specialist group, the IUCN specialist group on human-wildlife conflict and coexistence, is really working hard on actually defining these standardized indicators for measuring conflict, and they're in the process of sort of fleshing that out right now. And I think, again, it gets back to this evidence base that there's often, the number of projects that we support that deal with human-elephant conflict is immense, but when you go to repositories like conservation evidence, there's really not a lot of stuff that's been put into these databases that share a lot of these failures, lessons learned, and like you said, these are some of the most insightful things when communities, conservation partners, communities on the ground that are willing, again, built on relationships of trust, are willing to test and try and fail, and then adapt and try something else. And we see where, in many cases, some fairly low-tech, interventions can have a huge impact. From examples like that our elephant project has brought up, that Elephants Alive. We have partners in Tanzania, Southern Tanzania Elephant Program, that are doing really fabulous work on very low-tech interventions. And they've tested, failed, tried again, but they're putting those into publications that can inform the wider community of practice, but more importantly, they're bringing those results back to the communities that are most effective for validation, for vetting, and then finding out what's the best path forward from there.
Yeah, I can say benchmarking from where there have been success, and then collaborating where possible. Those two I'll mention as a way forward, and this is the right platform to do that.
I think this is something that Christine and I have spoken about for a long time, but it could be something that funders could potentially look at, and that's actually exchange programs. So funding where people that have a particular problem, and maybe it's similar circumstance, can exchange with other people in another country, and they can share the stories and the solutions. It's much better when the people that are experiencing the conflict are talking to each other than outsiders coming in and saying, well, this worked, you should try this. I think that would also really improve communication, and that feeling of solidarity, I think, is really important.
Yeah, no, I think communication and encouraging sites to, I think the whole scientific publishing process is important, but it's also lengthy, and maybe we need more sort of just case studies and encourage organizations to put out, a page on what they've tried and what happened, and get that out. And yeah, if there's, dedicated conferences or exchange programs that can be funded, that would be immensely helpful to get everyone together, and yeah, how to bring in community to that, because we tend to sit in these rooms talking about conservation technology, and no one here has probably got a farm that's being raided right now by an elephant. So we need to make that happen.
I've already kept you for 5 minutes, so I think we should wrap it up, but please do not hesitate to reach out to any of the panelists, to us. I think this is a conversation that needs to keep going. I'm inspired to host the Conference of Failures and to discuss and bring together solidarity. I think it's a really, really great point that has been made, and please can everyone join me in thanking our incredible panelists today.